Let's break down my favorite graphics from Super Bowl 58. Starting things off with this Patrick Mahomes MVP graphic. This was posted by the Kansas City Chiefs. By the way, stick around till the end of the video and I'll reveal which graphic is my absolute favorite. Right off the bat, I feel like you can never go wrong with big primary player cutout. A lot of emotion. There's a great choice of player images to use. And then just having it fade down into the primary title. Here they have this MVP text written out in this really cool gold chrome texture, and it's got some 3D beveling going on. I'm not sure if the designer did this exclusively in Photoshop. They may have done this 3D text in something like Illustrator or potentially Cinema 4D or Blender. I like the subtlety of the flares too, just giving some shine to the graphic. And then especially these like really faint line flares that are kind of part of the overall brightness that is developing in this bottom portion. It's really well balanced because you kind of have like a darker gradient background down at the bottom, which brings further contrast and makes that text really pop. Very clean background texture as well. You can see they're playing with the LVIII. They just have this repeating texture that has formed a sort of pattern in the background. And then you can see this like circle text going on the edges of the design. I've seen a lot of NFL graphics and the team graphics themselves. We're using the same circular text as a pretty consistent element across Super Bowl graphics, which I like. I think it works pretty well and just kind of looks like this cool complex ring. Now on to our second image, this really, really clean 49ers graphic. They posted a carousel of these and they were each featuring a different player. The Bosa one to me stuck out the most because the cutout selection, he's coming right at the camera, right at the viewer, which really makes a big difference. It kind of brings this whole thing to life. You can also see they've got this subtle motion blur going behind the cutout, and if you ever wanted to create that, you basically have your cutout, duplicate it, drag it behind, and then if you go up to filter, blur, either motion blur or radial blur, that should give you a similar effect. And they've masked out the areas that they didn't want the blur showing. So like down by his legs and the left side in general. So I really like how they created some depth with an inner shadow. You can see like this main card shape is stroked on the outside, and they have a soft inner shadow, which you can just get from your effects down here and go to inner shadow, play with those settings. They also have the shadow on this inner ring of, again, the same XLVII. This graphic is also really nice because of the subtle gradient usage. You can see like the brighter red to darker red gradient in these corners. And then in the corners of the card, you have like this glowing flare on either end. So that kind of fades in some brightness. Really well executed design. I'm a sucker for anything on a white or light gray background. Next up, we've got this BBC Sport graphic. I found this one just searching on Instagram for Super Bowl graphics. I just like the simplicity of this. I like kind of the old school throwback look. So you have like this low contrast look of the players, and then you have a pretty high contrast look of the city, and those two things kind of, you might think they go against each other, but they actually help the other stand out. So I thought that was cool. I feel like the layout design of this entire canvas is really clean and simple. You just got a big square with some text at the bottom. Also a good subtle way to add depth to like an otherwise pretty flat design is to do what this designer did and hide some cutouts behind parts of the background, so you can really feel like we're looking into the photo rather than just like a flat still image. And if you wanted to create something similar to this overall look, the low contrast and matte photo finish are kind of the key things to note here. So if you go to your adjustment layers, we can pull up a brightness contrast layer, honestly. If you just lower the contrast, I mean, you could see it's really not doing a ton to the cutouts, as opposed if we did high contrast, obviously that makes a big difference. But this whole thing kind of has a washed out look to it. So if you lower the contrast and then go up to your curves, I mean, you can see in this chart, in this diagram, these are the levels. Like the blacks are very low, so normally to create this matte look, I would click a couple low points on the curve and then click the rest to lock them into place. And then you can move up the lower end, but because they've already done that, we're not seeing much change. So just so you can see the effect a bit. But we've basically taken the low points, taken the blacks of the design and brought them up, so they're now like a dark gray. And then you can also see there's not much pure white in this design. Like barely any. Honestly, bringing down the whites too kind of loan themselves to this overall washed out, faded image look. Next up, we've got this really nice Texas Longhorns football graphic. Wasn't actively looking for college examples, but this one stood out to me. I just love a lot of the subtle details in this design, starting with what the player and coach are standing on. They've brought in like a little bit of probably the original photo, the grass that the cutout was standing on initially, and they've brought that into the image, which I like. Honestly, this very subtle trim texture that they have just going down the left side, I love it. I love this little bit of red. I don't know what this is, but I think it's such a nice little piece of flair and just a little extra touch to this design that just ups the intrigue level. Obviously, they've got a really great primary focus to this design, which is this really cool looking Longhorns NFL combo logo in the background, and I love that they put it on a swivel so you can kind of appreciate the 3D effect of it. They gave it a shadow, and then also just the type treatment at the top. It's a great example of hierarchy. You're bolding the most important information, Super Bowl, and then it's rounded out nicely with these three kind of evenly spaced logos and text. Last graphic we're going to look at today is this NFL on Fox graphic. There were so many champion graphic collages out there where they just took a bunch of player cutouts, threw them together on some background. This one to me stood out the most, probably because of the 3D nature of it. I would love to be able to tell you how to create a rusty metal shape like this and really make it pop and make it 3D. Unfortunately, I just have to direct you to Blender or Cinema 4D tutorials where I'm pretty sure the designer made that asset separately before bringing it in to Photoshop. But there's a lot of really impressive detail in these cutouts. I mean, the whole thing has this dramatic lighting to it. So the background has dramatic lighting, and then the designer matched that lighting with the player cutouts themselves. High contrast, highlights, and shadows. The shading, just kind of on the inner part of the ring, I think is perfect here. You got this cutout fading to darkness to kind of bring out the Rashee Rice cutout. Also, just take a moment to appreciate the cutout selection. These are all fantastic emotion shots. You got two guys yelling, one guy smiling, you got a really gritty looking Kelsey face, and then Mahomes, of course, king of the hierarchy. All really strong expressions, maybe save for Andy Reid. And then the hierarchy with the text too, like champs is the biggest readable text in this entire design. Then you just have like these smaller complementary elements finishing out the right side. I really like the balance of this graphic too. I think it's rare to see just kind of like a collage stacked and kind of smushed up against the left side, but this designer did it in a way where it doesn't feel off balance at all. I think it's because of these smaller things and just because of the complexity of the 3D background that they've chosen. But I think my biggest takeaway from this graphic is just the overall cohesion of the dramatic feel that it has, both with the facial expressions, the lighting and treatment on our players, and then the lighting and treatment on the background, and also just like this grittiness we're getting from this rusty metal texture. It all works so well together, and you're still getting like this nice pop of color, this nice overall balance in the composition. So it's really tough for me to pick a favorite. My final two were these NFL on Fox graphic and this playing card graphic from the 49ers. If I have to choose one, I gotta give it to the NFL on Fox graphic. I just think the whole thing is so well executed and is something I very much envy as a designer. I would love to be able to get to this level someday. If you know who designed any of these graphics, let me know and I'll drop their info in the video description and the comments as well. If you like this video, I made two other videos like this. I made an NFL one and an MLB one. I'll leave those videos here if you missed them. But in the meantime, let me know if you have any questions and I'll see you in the next one.